everybody. I'm Marilyn, founder and CEO of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of our weekly live video series called Centaur Stage. We're in the middle of our second season, all about the magic of teams and what makes teams cohesive, performing, and happy. And this season, we've organized things into 4 chapters. We've started this second chapter all about building teams back in December with Jonathan Yeo, who told us all about how to build diverse and inclusive teams. We had Sonal Bal also, who shared her insights on how to recruit for skills and culture fit and add. And now that we're back and hopefully refreshed from the holiday break, we want to continue learning about how to build great teams and how to ensure that our distributed teams are, doing really well and connected to each other and performing and creating value in the world. Every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. UAE time, myself and some incredible guests come here on LinkedIn Live, and we share insights and experiences and perspectives and stories around how to build great teams. Before we begin with today's show, please show us some love. Give this video a like, share it with someone who you think might enjoy it. And as always, please do leave your thoughts, your reactions, and any questions that you might have in the comments. We'll try and get through them during the live, and if not, Chase and I will come back later and answer you in the comments. So let me introduce Chase then. Our guest for today is Chase Warrington. He's the head of remote at Doist, a pioneer of remote work that specializes in productivity software. He's also very recently became an official member of the 2022 Forbes Business Council. Congratulations, Chase.
Thanks, Marilyn. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you. Let me introduce you a little bit more.
There's more. I thought that was it.
There's more. We want to know what Doist does, of course, because maybe they might find benefit in what they do. So for those of you who don't know what Doist is, they create award-winning task management app, Todoist and Twist, an asynchronous team communication platform that combines long-form discussions and chat messaging into one. And collectively, Doist apps support 25 million people globally to stay organized and productive. Chase himself has worked in both hybrid and remote first environments for over 12 years. He's managed teams spanning all time zones as one of Doist's 100 employees in 35 countries. He's a regular contributor, instructor, and consultant to many of the leading remote work organizations and publications, as well as hosting his own podcast about abroad. He's currently based in Spain, and he has joined us today from Valencia. Thank you so much again, Chase, for making the time for us. I'm very excited about our conversation.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. It's so cool to finally meet people face to face when you've been watching their work from a distance and communicating in the virtual world. This is really a pleasure for me. So thanks for having me.
Likewise. So Chase and I have been eyeing each other on LinkedIn, having conversations, commenting on each other's posts for quite a while now, and we finally made it here. So we're both really excited to be having this conversation. And today we're going to be discussing remote first teams. It's a subject that is dear to my heart and to Chase's. On the one hand, of course, Cosmic Centaurs is a remote first team. Having been born in the midst of the pandemic, we actually haven't all even met each other yet. And on the other hand, in the case of a lot of our clients, we're helping teams and organizations adapt or improve how they perform in remote settings. And of course, building remote first teams is not an easy task. There are so many different components to keep in check, from how you structure them, to how you design the work, to the tools that keep everyone connected and performing, to mental wellness and managing loneliness, to a million other things. And that's what Chase and I are going to be discussing here today. And we always like to start with the basics. So Chase, start us off with, what is a remote first team?
Yeah, great way to kick it off. So when we say remote first at Doist, we mean that we literally have no offices. We hire totally location agnostically. So we don't care where you're working from, when you're working, if you're in an office, a coffee shop, your bedroom, wherever it may be, a beach in Bali. We don't care. We just want to measure the work that gets done and not where it gets done from. So for us, we're 100 people in 35 different countries spanning all time zones. And we have teammates who have sometimes moved and I didn't even know they moved. Show up, oh, you moved from Greece to the UK. I had no idea. We've been working together for months. And others who are full-time travelers, people who just live very normal lives in their suburban homes. But people get to choose where they work from, and that's what's very, very important to being remote first.
Yeah, and I know that, of course, being able to travel and explore the world is very dear to your heart. What other advantages of having remote first teams do you think one can observe?
Yeah, this is one of those things that for me has changed over time. So when I was younger, travel and adventure and things like this were what really drew me to remote work. I also just was totally bored by the idea of sitting in a cubicle all day and just could not imagine that. But I wanted to have a real career and as well. So finding balance there was fun. But admittedly, early on, it was about the adventure and nomading and exploring different corners of the world. And I still enjoy that in certain aspects of my life. But really the majority of what I think is important today is really giving people the choice to choose where they get to be at any given time. And this has an effect on people's lives in myriad ways. I mean, we had somebody, for instance, who was able to move back home during the waning years of his father's life and let his kids get to know his grandfather. And this is in a super remote place where otherwise, without remote work, this person would have never had that chance to be with his parents. We've had people move across the world to give their children a better opportunity when they lived in a country where there weren't many opportunities. I've seen people's lives change dramatically through remote work, just getting the opportunity to make money online because there's no economy where they live, or a couple that gets to finally settle down together because they're from two different countries and otherwise one of them wouldn't been able to stay in the other person's country. So these are really personal things that are very heavily affected just by the opportunity to have work. And it seems like such a minor thing on the surface, but when you start digging a little bit deeper, you see how heavily this impacts real people in very real ways.
Yeah, that's really true. Actually, in our first season of Centaur Stage, we had the Rama Shakaki who came over and talked to us about how remote work impacts the lives of refugees and minorities in certain countries. So we underestimate how important sometimes it is to just have access to work. And do you think that there's an advantage to building remote teams for the companies themselves beyond the kind of human story?
Yeah. There's two pieces to this, right? And I think it's like something that's become a little bit cliche to talk about all the human elements, all the things that I just very clichély did. But it's okay to also say that, hey, this can be great for your bottom line as well. GitLab is a fantastic example. Just issued a $13 billion IPO recently, a fully remote team. And remote teams like ours that are shedding the weight that comes with the financial weight and the financial burden that comes with having a specific location, also the access to opportunities that you have in terms of hiring and building a culture that brings people from multiple perspectives into one room. I think if you have a very homogenous conference room where you're sitting around with a bunch of people who have a bunch of the same ideas, you're really limited your ceiling is very, very low. We're collaborating with people who are coming from a bunch of different backgrounds, different education systems, different thought processes, and we get the best of all worlds in that way. So there's a ton of reasons why remote makes sense from a business sense. And so, yeah, I think it's easy to hone in on one or the other, but it's the mix of the two, that human element and the business sense, that make it really a special space.
Yeah, and also make it sustainable. Companies can do it on the long run, and people appreciate and have, as Tyler said in our audience, broad-reaching positive effects.
I like that.
So putting together a remote first team requires quite a few things. Let's start with the humans. It requires us to recruit people all over the world. Of course, there are some common, attributes or skills that we often, hear about when you're recruiting remotely, like the ability to write really well, some mindsets around diversity and like your ability to comprehend other cultures and so on. What would you say are, in your view, some extra skill sets or attributes of really great team members in a remote team?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of the ones that I would naturally go to first, and I think those can't be overstated enough. That the ability to write. I've seen there's some phenomenally smart people with great experience that really struggle to present themselves in the written word. They're awesome verbally. They would do great in this setting that you and I are in right now, but not have the ability to articulate that in a concise and yet also thorough way. And so that really can't be said enough. The emphasis on writing is so important. And I've not met any leader in any remote team that wouldn't probably put that in the top three when asked this question. So I want to re-emphasize that. Another one I think that should be given some extra thought is the ability to work autonomously and to be able to shift gears from one thing to the next. It is true that asynchronous communication, being the core of the way that most remote teams work, can be slower in some senses, and it can really slow down if you're not the kind of person that can sort of take the reins and switch gears when you're blocked on something. If you have a teammate on the other side of the world that isn't available to unblock something for you, of course, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be blocked at all. There would be some mechanism in place to unblock it, but it does happen. You need to be able to switch gears and start on something else, and you need to have the confidence to do that. The team needs to be empowered. The teammates need to feel empowered and be able to do that, but you need to be able to have the confidence and the willingness to shift gears and start on something else or finish something else during those working hours. So I think that's worth mentioning because it could easily be overlooked. And I look for that when I'm hiring, and we kind of bake that into our hiring process at Doist.
What do you ask? How do you find out if someone's a self-starter?
We're normally looking at this from the standpoint of how, like, we ask a lot of questions to just get into the interview stage. So basically, by the time someone gets to an interview, they've responded to a few questions that may not directly ask this, but we ask for examples of ways in which they've exhibited certain things, or tell us about a time when, or how would you approach this? And we're looking for that sort of underneath the dirt a little bit there. So the answer to the question is one thing, but the way that you respond and the autonomy that you exhibit is something we're explicitly looking for. Little cheat code there for you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. The ability to be a self-starter is such an important one. So we brought together the team. Now we need to help them communicate. In the olden days, our main channel was the office, right? Like, it was a physical space. And now, of course, we've replaced a lot of that need for being together with technology. So we can't ask a question about building great remote teams without asking about the great tools. Of course, Todoist and Twist, happy to have you talk a little bit more about them, but talk us through kind of what's the arsenal that needs to be available to a remote team.
Yeah, I can't talk about the way that we work at Doist without mentioning Todoist and Twist. So without, I'll try not to just brush that to the side, and also try not to just plug our products. So I'm totally biased, but we're a very asynchronous team, and we already mentioned earlier, Marilyn, that asynchronous communication is at the core of how the successful remote teams work. And so I think the more asynchronous you can go in terms of your tool stack is probably the easiest path to success. The truth is that you can use a wide variety of tools to work asynchronously. Technically, email is an asynchronous tool. Even instant messaging could be as asynchronous as you wanted it to be. But certain tools lend themselves to embracing async better than others. So for us, that tool is Twist. It's our product. We built it. We built it for ourselves. And it does a phenomenal job of pushing us to be asynchronous in every way possible. But there's a ton of tools out there. The default, of course, is Slack. I personally get an instant messagey vibe from Slack, and I know a lot of other teams do as well. But it is the default that people go to, and it can be used asynchronously. There's some emerging tools that I really, really like that are helping with other forms of asynchronous communication. Yak comes to mind, YAC. I love what the team at Yak is doing. It's asynchronous voice communication, because sometimes the written word just isn't enough. You can't convey emotion enough and things like that. So some of these emerging tools like Yak, Loom, and Cloud App, which help with asynchronous video recordings, these all provide an asynchronous way to communicate, but also, also give you different ways to express yourself: video, audio, written form, all very important. And then there's a bunch of other collaborative tools, which all sort of center around the word transparency, I would say. So you want to prevent using tools that are locked in a silo, where email is a great example of where communication gets locked in a silo. two people are emailing, if somebody else doesn't have access to that email chain, they don't know what's going on in that conversation. The alternative is not good. You have to reply all, bring a bunch of people into one email chain. You wake up and have 72 emails that you don't even have to read. That's not good either. So you want to find tools that are transparent and like Google Docs and Dropbox paper and Sheets and things like this, things that bring people into the same place and allow them to collaborate on their time in the same space.
Yeah, that's really such a great point. And just a note on Slack, like those of us old enough to remember, but to me, Slack is like a really pretty version of MIRC. I don't know if you're old enough to have used that. But, I am. I have to admit that was my first like foray into the internet, was using like ICQ and MIRC. And Slack really reminds me of that. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, the first version of it, at least, was built on top of an MIRC framework. So,
I didn't know that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because it's like Doist, for instance, as a company, we were built on Slack. So we built our company running on Slack, and we just had this underlying anxiety running through us the whole time that we just learned to live with. That like, we just all thought we were like, yeah, we're asynchronous, but like, were we really? And as we grew from 10 people to 30 people and 30 to 70 and 70 to 100, it just, that anxiety became less underlying and more on the surface. And, and we were less and less asynchronous, though we were just saying we're asynchronous. So anyway, it's an awesome tool. And I don't have any qualms about
use it in my
that.
company, but I understand what you mean.
It's just different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, absolutely. My next question was going to be about culture, actually, and we do have a couple of questions in the audience about it. So Marie asked about your company values. How did you uncover them? Were you together in the same room when you wrote them down or not? And Maya asked about the activities and rituals that you perform in your team. And I'm going to wrap that up in a broader question, which is to say, like, you've got the team, you've given them the tools, maybe you've set up the work and told them, everybody knows what they need to be working on, and hopefully they're self-starters and they're doing the work. But then how do you bring in culture in remote first teams? So talk about values, rituals, or anything else that you think is relevant.
This is my favorite topic these days, because I feel like we figured out the work pretty good. Like we have an 8-figure business, and we manage 100 people in 30 plus countries, and our apps succeed in their relative space. And so it's like we've figured out the work part, and now it's really about how the human part. It's about connecting as individuals and stuff. And so I've just wrote an article on this. If people really want to get into the nitty gritty, you can go to the Doist blog, blog.doist.com. There's a remote work section. It's the most recent article on there about how to humanize async work. And it goes through all the activities that we do at Doist to incorporate culture into our work. But the first thing I want to say, and I make it really clear in that article, is like, we have taken the stance that socializing isn't how you build culture. We build culture actually through how we work. So we subscribe to the idea that we're a team, not a family kind of thing, borrowing from the Netflix gurus over there. And so we really do bond around our work. We use work as the way that connects us. And one of the beautiful things about remote work is that, HR didn't choose our friends for us. We're not confined to these 4 walls of an office where our friends have kind of been decided, okay, we're going to be friends with the people in this office. We connect at work, and then we're free in the afternoons or the mornings or whenever we want to connect with the people in our local communities or our families. And so there's something to be said for that. But no doubt building team cohesion and culture is super important in a remote team as well. And we just want to recognize some of those principles first. So some of the activities that we do to connect as a remote team are kind of broken down into a few categories. One is we actually do, in normal times, non-COVID times, in real life meetups. We bring people together twice a year with their individual teams. So the marketing team goes somewhere, or the Android team goes somewhere, and they spend a week together in a location. And then we bring the whole company together to one location every year as well. So that's always a lot of fun. We're hoping to start those back up here in 2022. We also send new hires on a mentorship trip. So they get paired up with someone on their team, and you get to go spend a week getting to know one of your teammates, working together, learning the ropes during their onboarding process. We also started adding like some perks and incentives for people to just create their own little meetups. So we subsidize some of the travel and entertainment if people decide to create their own meetups. So every Doist employee has the ability to do that, and we'll subsidize it. But those are only, those are the exceptions to the rules. Those are only a couple days or weeks out of the year. So what we do beyond that has to do a lot with virtual meetups, creating fun ways for us to interact both synchronously over video and asynchronously. We've built out some asynchronous games, some bots, and different question asking games that work within Twist and automated a lot of that. And I think without going into too many details on all the individual activities, one thing that's really important is to make that part of the workday. So leadership has to exhibit that, hey, we see this as important. It's not added on top of your work, because if you give everybody the choice between doing their work and doing a 1 hour casual hangout, as we call it, just a video call for an hour with a group of people, you're going to probably choose your work. But we bake that into the workday, so it's not added on top, and leadership participates and encourages people to do that. So there's a bunch of ways you can do it, and it can be done, but it takes intentionality and leadership from the top down saying that it's important.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, honestly. I think that's a lot of the conversations we have with our clients all the time. It's like, I can give you all the recipes. By the way, you don't even need to pay me. You can go on Google.
Yeah.
A lot of things are available, right? Like there's no silver bullet, but it's really this intentionality, waking up every day thinking like, how am I going to contribute today? And I definitely agree. Like any sign from the leader that they think this is secondary, and everybody reporting into them will also treat it as secondary. And so you can't slip up on that. It has to be something that you're focused on every day. And you mentioned a little bit about like how you have both synchronous and asynchronous activities on the culture side. I want to take us to a discussion about asynchronous work. When I first started Cosmic Centaurs back in April 2020, the first thing I wanted to do was to help leaders and executives kind of just understand what are the 3 things you need to figure out about how to manage this whole remote work thing, especially for people who have never done it before. It really was a whole new world for them. And I think the first presentation I ever gave was about this shift from synchronous to asynchronous work. And I know you're feel quite strongly about it. I know you also wrote a blog post for Shift, where you even went as far as saying that you don't think that one should have daily stand-ups at all, like no opportunities for synchronous interactions. A bit extreme for me. I'm a heavy extrovert. Like I need to see human beings at least once a day or I crumble on the inside. But talk to me about your position there.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert as well, and I crave the human interaction. And it's one of the interesting things about my role as head of remote at Doist. I'm also responsible for all the creating those the ways in which we interact outside of work and well within work as well. But one of them, incorporates this actual in real life element and creating curated events for us to when we actually get together. Some of it's virtually. And so I crave that as well. And I I think we need that in our life. But what I don't think is super efficient is requiring people to be on camera for work, elements of work, which could be done asynchronously. So what I suggest teams do is kind of pressure test every single activity that you do internally and see if it could be done asynchronously better. Your answer may be no. Every team is different. So Marilyn, in your case, if you feel the daily stand-up really helps add value to your team, then that's awesome. But it's worth asking the question. For us, it's not. We have people spread across every time zone. So if I want to do a daily stand-up with my team, what does that look like? When somebody lives in Australia and then somebody else lives in California, how does that daily stand-up work? I don't really want to make the guy in Australia get on at 9:30 p.m. to say what he's going to do tomorrow or what he did yesterday. So these things done asynchronously take up less time generally. I've seen stand-up meetings that last 30, 45 minutes with 10 people in them. And I do the math and I go 10 people, 45 minutes. How many collective hours is that when it could have just been done asynchronously? So different, it's different for every team. But when you start thinking about these activities, it can be hard to actually justify them if they weren't the norm in the first place. At Doist, we've never had one company-wide stand up across like the entire company. It's never happened, and we don't do the virtual like weekly or daily stand-ups either. So that's what's worked for us.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think you make a really beautiful argument about like testing things at different scales. Of course, this works for a team like mine. There's 8 of us. We're in proximity to each other. Like the biggest time difference is 3 hours. It's all still manageable. And so I completely agree with you. Like if that stretched a little bit further than that, then the system would break. And I think it's great to see what works at different scales. And it's great to also just kind of frequently question it again. I think that advice that you gave about just like stress test it. Try to think about what it would look like asynchronously and how bad would it be and what would you lose, and then try to figure out if it works. I think stress testing is a really great point. And you can, as you scale and grow and shift and expand into different time zones, then you can't do the same things anymore. I remember this example, I think it was a Sheryl Sandberg example about how when she was at Google, they used to celebrate everybody's birthdays when it was their birthday, and then they started growing, and then they started doing a monthly get together because there were so many of them that became a full-time job. And then eventually it just got to a scale where it wasn't doable anymore. And so I think that, getting a sense of that range is really, really so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I just add one thing onto that. I think that when we throw around this word intentionality a lot with remote work, people say it a lot. I've probably said it 12 times already in this discussion. And that's intentionality. That's what we mean when we say intentionality, like intentionally test each one of your processes. So if you're going from a in-office space to now trying to do remote, that would be an intentional way to go about creating your remote culture. And it's not about completely subscribing to the Doist way or the GitLab way or the whatever team way. It's just what works for you and being intentional about each of those practices. And the teams that have made that transition successfully have gone through that process meticulously.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. So I have a question for you that's coming from the audience. And I'm going to reframe it slightly. So Daniela asks, how do you handle conflict in your team? And I'm going to ask, how do you manage asynchronous conflict?
That's a great question. Not asynchronously, honestly. So I mean, this is a great moment to interject synchronous activity, and so this is generally when we will switch to a synchronous method. Is when you're obviously seeing conflict, or when something just isn't jiving in the asynchronous world. That's the perfect place to build in some synchronous connection. That's the short answer. In my opinion, happy to go deeper.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense to me. I mean, one of the teams I used to manage back in the day, we had teams across so North America and then the Middle East. So the time difference was huge. We never overlapped practically. And then I remember one of our team members, he was this really incredibly smart developer, and he always had like really great points to make. But we would wake up the next morning in Beirut, and it would be like a 3-pager of why he thinks somebody is wrong written on Slack, and we'd be like, I don't even know how to answer you. It's just so difficult. So I definitely I don't know how you would do conflict asynchronously.
I'll add a little bit to this actually, because if anybody's familiar with the radical candor mindset, it's really it's embracing this idea that you have to provide very radical candor, radical feedback, and so. I think it's important in an async company to have that, because it opens the door for everybody to give feedback and express their thoughts in a very deep, thorough, and sometimes perceived negative way. But if you have a culture that really embraces that, the recipient, it has to be delivered correctly. I mean, there's a way to tell someone that you disagree, and there's a way not to, obviously. And I don't think that changes really synchronous or asynchronous. But if it's written out, one of the real benefits of asynchronous communication is that you take away a lot of the emotion, right? So like if you and I are disagreeing on something right here on video, emotions get heightened. We just say what's coming to mind. Maybe we're not really thinking completely thorough. I'm not taking the time to understand you. But in the written format, when I wake up and I see the comment from Beirut and I go, okay, now I've got 24 hours to really think about this and respond with how I truly feel, or maybe absorb some of their emotion here, and maybe I'll come around and understand. So I think conflict done asynchronously in a culture that embraces it and says that's conflict is going to be good for us and it's going to work and it's how we're going to get to the real success that we're wanting to achieve, then it can actually be done in a really good and healthy way. But when you get to an impasse and things are just getting heated, it's time to go synchronous.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here from Rhea, and we'll come back to radical candor and trust and all of these concepts in a minute, but just kind of wrap it up on that intentionality piece. So I'll read it out. What tips would you give leaders to think more intentionally about how to have team members interact virtually in a way that's valuable? What behavioral patterns should leaders be keeping an eye on? What questions should they be asking themselves to make sure that their team's interactions are like productive, and even if it's disagreeing with each other, but that they're leading to something creating value?
It's a good question. I guess there's a lot wrapped up in there. And so my initial thought, so it returns back to the leaders need to set a really good example in this stage and show that, they make time for the social aspect of life online within their team. Show that, it's important for them to disconnect from work and return to work when it's good for them, that deep work is important. And then there's a time for synchronous work. So setting that example is really good. And I think also it's important to not try to go too far in terms of like crafting moments of serendipitous conversation and things like this. Like some of this just needs to happen naturally. There's a very fine line between creating a bunch of Zoom happy hours and doing nothing at all in this regard. And so you have to, again, be intentional about creating this space and creating the right balance of good quality activities that actually add value and allow people to connect and those that don't. And there's some ways to automate this. There's some great tools out there that you can use to facilitate this, but a lot of it just comes down to like the company culture and how you choose to allow people to get together in a social space and in a workspace. So there's a lot to unpack there with tools, best practices, company culture, leadership. But finding the right balance between those things is a good starting point.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of balance, it's like what I'm going to ask you next. But one of the things that I often also bring up is that, for example, you wrote a blog post, I think, in Doist, where you were mentioning that working asynchronously in your case has also allowed you to have a better work life. You spoke earlier about connecting with your colleagues in the morning and then connecting with your local community in the afternoon, and just being able to strike a balance that's different, where you don't always choose work. Now, many people, of course, agree with that, but there's also so many who feel like remote work doesn't give them an opportunity to compartmentalize. Remote work is always favored by leaders. If you look at the data, depending on your family situation, whether you have children or not, if you're a caregiver or not, there's a broad spectrum. Not everybody thinks that working from home is like the holy grail. What are your thoughts on that? And do you ever recruit people like that into a company or a team like Doist? Do you just think okay, great, you can go work for the local bank? How do you account for that type of diversity where someone's saying, well, actually, I really don't think that my work-life balance is that much better?
Yeah. And especially during the pandemic, right? Like a lot of people experience remote work or work from home for the first time during the pandemic, which is not a good example of what it could be if done correctly. And so, yeah, remote work isn't for everybody. Work from home isn't for everybody. And so I think starting with admitting that is a good first step, especially if you really realize it's not for you. On the organizational level, I think there's things you can do to mitigate that. During the hiring process, we are screening for that. We want to know. We've hired people that haven't done remote work before, and they come in and they do great. We've hired others actually the majority of anybody that's left Doist voluntarily has been because they realized, okay, this remote thing isn't for me. I prefer an office. I need to separate. And on the organizational level, some things that we do, for instance, are like we provide a co-working stipend. So I work at a co-working every single day. I got to get out of my house. I went crazy during lockdown. So and I experienced what a lot of people talk about, even though I'm very cognizant of this. I leaned into work heavily during the lockdown phase, and a lot of us did. And we had this big spike in productivity because there was nothing else to do. Everybody worked really hard. And then all of a sudden, there was a big burnout phase following that, and signs of depression and morale going down, and all kinds of things. So, extrapolate that out. We're a team that's used to working remotely. A lot of us have been working remotely for over a decade, and all of a sudden we're experiencing what a lot of people are talking about. So I totally get it. And so on the organizational level, I think you have to do some things to help people disconnect. You have to have that culture that embraces, hey, you should disconnect. Leaders have to show that it's important to me to disconnect. I share with my team what I'm doing. I'm not shy about the fact that I take a 3-hour break in the middle of my day every day. And that works for me. I kind of break my day up into 2 different phases, and work in the morning, work in the afternoon, and a 3-hour break in the middle of the day. And I share that with my team. So embracing that on a team level, and then on an individual level, do some very basic things like think about how you want your perfect day to go. If you have the ability to craft your perfect work day, think about what that looks like. Like, what time do you start? Do you want to wake up with an alarm clock or not? Do you want to work from home, and where in the home do you want to work for? Do you want to go to co-working or a cafe? Have some plan. Don't just wing it every day. My friend Jesse, the CEO at Workforce, says it beautifully. He says, just put on pants, like just get dressed, get ready for work every day, and separate that moment of waking up in your home life from what you're going to start doing at work. And then start putting I put personal things on my work calendar, which might sound backwards, but for instance, I have, lunch with friends, or that 3-hour break in the middle of the day is on my calendar, and therefore nobody can book time with me during that. And I don't change that ever. And I put, if I've got activities that I want to use to separate work from life, I put them on my calendar, even down to, take the dog on a walk. So these little things will help you separate work from life. If the company embraces that, you shouldn't be working all the time, and that you need to disconnect in order to show up as the best version of yourself every day, then you can make it work, even if you're not naturally a remote work person.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And I think being kind of, there's a burden on the company or the organization to kind of enable everybody's choices. There's also a burden on everybody to communicate their preferences. Like I think it's always important to strike the balance. Everybody is co-responsible in this, right? So if you're an employee and you're just sitting in the back and excuse my French, you're bitching about the rules, but you're not actually saying, here's what I would prefer. How about this alternative? I know you offered me this benefit, but I would actually prefer to use it towards that. Like if you're not actually communicating your individual preferences, then you shouldn't get too upset if they're not heard, because then people can't guess everything that you need. And I think that's really important. And I think that brings me to this question about trust. I know that one of the values or virtues maybe at Doist is that you trust your teammates by default. Of course, trust is important in any kind of human enterprise, and of course, more specifically in remote teams. We know that also there's like different kinds of trust. There's effective trust, which is based on feelings and how much we feel like others are caring or are concerned by us. And then there's also cognitive trust, which is that we believe that the person is reliable, dependable, they'll do their job, they're competent, et cetera, et cetera. How do you develop trust in teams off the bat? Is it just like that's communicated when you're onboarded? You're like, you got to trust everybody. You may have lost me for a second. I don't know if you got that.
I missed this. I missed the last little bit, but I got the gist of the question. It froze there for a second, but I think trust and transparency are like they go hand in hand here, and I think you create a lot of trust by being super transparent. So At Doist, we over communicate. We're very explicit in our communication. We share, instead of having the daily stand up. Another reason I think the alternative to a live daily stand up is that it's much easier to hold someone accountable when something's written down and said, here's what I'm doing this week, and here's what and then reporting back written, here's how I did on those things last week, which can sometimes be lost in the video voice collaboration space. So being very transparent about what we're doing on a weekly, monthly, semi-annually, and annually basis is very core to the way that we work, and we're constantly reporting back on how we did, and allowing space for failure and for not meeting deadlines and falling short is also very important. Like we want to create a space where people can say, these were the things I was going to do this month. I did 70% of them. These are the things I didn't do. This one failed, and embracing that and saying, yeah, that's a part of the work. That creates trust. It's not explicitly saying I trust you to do this and you trust me to do this, but it creates this company culture where it's like that kind of thing is perfectly okay. And we have a very easy way to go back and kind of report on how things have been done during that time. It's also really important to empower your teammates in a remote environment, and that builds trust. So we give people the ability to make a decision, and we do this in a cross collaborative way. It's not just within your team, like within the marketing team or within the finance team or the Apple team, but we have a cross functional project management system, which creates new project managers every single month from various levels within the organization. And they are empowered when they're the head of that team. We call it a squad leader. When you're the head of that squad, you might be an intern leading a squad that has the CEO in there. And in that space, you're empowered to make the decision. You're the leader. And so this creates trust amongst teammates. And if that person fails, we say, okay, that's fine. That's part of the journey. So there's all these little things you can bake into the way that you work to create trust without specifically saying, we're creating trust right now. It's kind of in the way that you work.
Yeah. Okay. So that covers the cognitive trust. Like you're reliable, you're dependable, you do what you're going to say, and when you don't, you're explicit about it, and so on. There's a question from the audience and a question from me. So Sajjan says, how effectively do you think we can really communicate our emotions through an email? And that relates to my question about effective trust, which is the trust around, I know that Chase cares about me as an individual, not just that we both contribute our part of the work, not both that we can perform well, but that also there's that interconnectedness between the humans on the team. And how do you create that?
It is admittedly challenging to get people in a very asynchronous environment, in a remote environment where you don't get to spend a lot of time together, even virtually. This is definitely a challenge, and one of the challenges that when people say this is the hard part about remote work, I say, yeah, I know. We again return to the word of intentionality and creating specific spaces for this. So we have again, I think a lot of this comes from connecting on a human level and collaborating with each other on conversations that take place outside of work. And we create specific spaces for that. So in this article that I referenced earlier, there's a very long list of the actual activities that we do. But to summarize those, we create a bunch of optional activities to unite people around things that interest them. So we have some asynchronous ways. We have specific spaces where people go to chat about parenting or book clubs that they love, or gardening or travel or whatever. We have spaces where people can go to spend time together and chat about things that really interest them. We created what we called crews, which are like volunteer committees for people to tackle things within the company that improve the employee experience, like diversity and inclusion is a great example, where this way people can connect on things and really get to learn about what makes each other tick and what they can unite around outside of work. So trust gets built through these kind of activities, no different than in the quote unquote real world. It's just providing the space to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll also link to that blog post in the comments so that our audience can go and check it out for themselves. And with that, Chase, I think you and I could still be here for another hour talking, but I have to bring us to our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I hope so.
So
I'm a bit nervous.
don't be. It's not a test, I promise. Of course, we're going to ask you to complete a sentence with 1 or 2 or 3 words. And I'm going to ask you the first one. So the one thing every team needs is...
Sorry, Marilyn, it cut out. Can you say it again?
Oh, yes. The one thing that every team needs is ...
One thing that every team needs is strong leadership.
Oh, brilliant. The one thing a team needs to avoid?
Synchronous meetings.
Of course. So speaking of strong leadership, a good team leader is?
A leader by example.
Nice. What's the best book on teams?
I'm going with my current favorite, The Culture Map, specifically for remote and diversified teams.
That's a really great one. Aaron Meyer, right?
Yeah, it's brilliant. Brilliant. If you're working across multiple cultures, it's like a necessary read.
Completely. And then last but not least, what is your personal favorite team ritual?
Oh, the 2-word answer is ask Doist. But I have to give some context. We have one of our teammates has taken it upon himself to frequently post in a public place in Twist, ask Doist, and he comes up with these hilarious, sometimes very simple but hilarious questions that we all choose to answer or not answer or just read, and they range from they can be very thought-provoking or they can be very simple, but it's so interesting to hear the answers that come across 35 different countries. So for instance, like, what do you put on your toast was one of the questions. And to hear what people put on their toast from all these different corners of the world is like an amazing thing. So I personally love this. It's so simple and so effective. And it's so cool to see people connecting around things like, oh, I also put anchovies on my toast. Like in this corner of the world, you're like, what? So anyway, it's really fun, simple thing that I love the way that something so simple can blossom into something so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do a shameless plug over here, but maybe you know this. We created a game actually for teams. I have it right here. I'm going to plug it in. It's called Cosmic Conversations, and it's essentially exactly that. It's a series of questions. You can pick up a card and ask everybody. You can do it obviously asynchronously in your chat. You can do it in person in a team meeting. But I just like you, I mean, the entire team at Cosmic Centaurs, like, we love this, and we do lighthearted, silly questions, and we do like deep ones, and we always feel more connected to each other also after a round of Cosmic Conversations. So I'm going to join you there with that ritual.
I love it. I want to check out Cosmic Conversations. That sounds great. We also start all of our team any meetings that we do have. They're rare, but when we do have like a team, like when the marketing team gets together, for instance, we start every meeting with a lighthearted question like that, like, what's your superpower, or what would be your superpower, or something like this to kick us off. So yeah, it's important. Like these are little simple things you can do to build some camaraderie.
I agree. All right, Chase, thanks for that. And before we leave, of course, I want to thank you for joining us and for all the insights that you shared. I could see from the audience engagement that you really gave us quite a few nuggets there, and I'm sure everybody has learned quite a bit from everything that you've shared. So thank you so much for making the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's super fun. And I hope there was some good nuggets in there, but I appreciate the conversation, and I love what you guys are doing. And it's very, very cool for me as well to be here. So thank you again.
Thanks so much. And before we wrap up, of course, I want to thank our attendees who tuned in and engaged and asked us questions. And as always, the video is available on our socials forever. We'll repost it later in the week on our YouTube and our website. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes or other content that we post, you can go ahead and go to our website, cosmiccentaurs.com, and maybe just sign up for our newsletter. I can guarantee you that, like, Tala and Kerma and Maya and everybody else who contributes content. We'll be really happy to see our numbers go up. So we'd love to see you there. And last but not least, mark your calendars for next week, January 13th, Thursday, same time as today, 3:30 p.m. UAE time. I'll be hosting Saima Siddiqui. She's the CEO and co-founder at Grad Greenhouse, and we'll discuss what it's like to bring in fresh grads into your teams. And I do hope to see you all there. And I'm signing us off for this week.
Yeah.